This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. One of the past year's biggest religious stories was the visit of Pope Francis to the United States, and lay Catholic commentator Fred Rotondaro assesses his message. Political analyst Lee Drutman tells us what's wrong with our political system, partly the quality of the candidates. And Bill Press talks with West Wing Report's editor Paul Brandus about President Obama's year. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Fred Rotondaro, a regular commentator here and chair of Catholics in Alliance for the Common Good, says Pope Francis is setting a standard that Catholic progressives and the church hierarchy have to follow up on. And we say hello to Fred Rotondaro, regular commentator for americasdemocrats.org and chair of Catholics in Alliance for the Common Good. Fred Rotondaro, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Jim, thank you very much for having me.
Well, always nice to talk to you, of course. Fred, from someone as active in Catholic lay politics as you, do you see there being a likely long-lasting effect of the visit by Pope Francis to the United States?
Yeah, I do, Jim. I think it comes in two different areas, one of which is that the Pope obviously has inspired so many millions of Catholics who have, in honesty, given up on aspects of the church. And a lot of Catholics are coming to the church, more importantly, than just showing up at Mass. I don't think that's where Catholics are concerned about these days. But a lot of Catholics are saying the church under this Pope wants to deal with some of the issues that are important in my life. And I think the second aspect is he's kind of reactivated progressive organizations to say, to be honest, to the American Catholic hierarchy, gentlemen, and as we know, they're all men, no women, gentlemen, we really want the church in America to pick up on what the Pope is saying. There are more important issues than you want to deal with. Mm-hmm. So I think in two ways he's reactivated a lot of Catholics, and of course given Catholicism a much greater respect in the world eyes than it's had in years.
Yeah, I was going to say he's actually had, it seems, a very positive effect on other Christian religions and other religions in general. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. He's made the church very, very, very relevant. The reality is that over the course of the last 20, 30 years, with the child abuse scandals, with a variety of problems within the church, a lot of church members, a lot of church leaders, organizations have simply said, the church isn't speaking to me. And he's, again, reminded people, both Catholics and non-Catholics, that the church is speaking to very relevant issues.
Now, from a purely partisan point of view, do his sermons help white working-class voters become more amenable to progressive political policies?
They do, they will, but the sermons have got to be followed up in the pews. The sermons have got to be followed up by the bishops, by the priests. White working-class voters are, to me, the greatest enigma voting class in this country. They have been, over the course of 30 years, absolutely brutalized. Their futures, the futures of their kids, have been, and yet, for several reasons, they continue to vote for right-wing forces that are enacting the policies that are keeping wages stagnant, that take money away from education, health programs. There are reasons for this, but I think the Pope is setting a standard that Catholic progressives have to follow up on, and very, very importantly, that the Catholic hierarchy has to follow up on. I'm not sure the Catholic hierarchy is doing that. As of right now, I would give it a failing grade of about a C- at best in following up on the lead of the Pope.
Yeah, I wouldn't think you have so much to worry about the people as much as you do the hierarchy. Just Catholics in general, I think everyone is, gosh, what a refreshing voice, what a refreshing leader. They're all falling in line. The upper level, I'm not so sure about that. There's a lot of pushback and a lot of people that say, hey, look, let's not break the system we've all known for so long. Yeah,
the bishops just held in mid-November their annual winter conference. They held it in Baltimore, and the issues they dealt with were talking about some new saints. They're going to define pornography. They're doing jurisdictional things, elections. The two featured speakers were Cardinal Dolan, who I personally consider to be very, very conservative, and the Vatican nuncio to the United States, who is the man who is being blamed for having arranged that meeting when the Pope was in town with Kim Davis. Nowhere during their several-day conference did they deal actively with issues of inequality, of poverty, of health care. They didn't get the memo. They just did not get the memo. They're not on top of the issues that really matter to American Catholics. They've got to get there. The Pope is leading from above. And I think Catholic organizations and progressive Catholics have really got to start pressuring from below for the change to really start occurring in American Catholicism. And so far, it's not here.
Now, when Pope Francis's time on earth is up, do you foresee a backlash in the College of Cardinals against his view of how the economy should work for poor people, or against his relative tolerance of alternative lifestyles?
Yeah, I do. As a matter of fact, I think you can begin to see some of that backlash even now, where you had small groups of cardinals, church leaders who object to his philosophy regarding making the church more inclusive. The church gets ridiculous at certain times, and I speak as a Catholic, so I'm allowed to say this. I speak as an Italian Catholic, as a very good friend of mine, Father Tom Reese, he's a Jesuit, says, as an Italian, I have anti-clericalism in my DNA. So I'm allowed to say some of these things, but the church will say to a murderer, "Come, be part of our community." The church will look at a woman who's had an abortion and say, "Go away." Or they will look at someone who's been divorced, "Go away." But if you're influential and you had enough money and you got an annulment, come on in, join the church. You can't do that. People are too intelligent these days. People are too analytical, and they just won't accept that.
Mm-hmm. While on the topic of some social issues, what do you make, if anything, of Bernie Sanders' call for the federal decriminalization of marijuana?
I don't know enough about it, Jim. Did you ever think that you would ask me a question about which I had no opinion?
No. As a matter of fact, I'm at a loss for words because you don't have words.
We're both at a loss. There will now be air silence for 30 seconds right. As Mr. Cuddy and Mr. Rotondaro don't say a word. My tendency is to say, well, that's probably a good thing, but I just don't know enough about it from a medical point of view. I do think that in general, the United States has it criminalizes too many things. You know, the percentage of Americans who are incarcerated is mind-blowing. We have, I think, it's the highest percentage in the civilized world. Americans don't realize as we go on about what a wonderfully free and open society we are, how many fellow Americans are criminalized for what in other parts of the world would be considered misdemeanors or absolutely nothing at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of imbalance, and not just with marijuana. There are a lot of punishments that don't necessarily fit the crime, and so this is one of them certainly. That's leading to.
I think it was about 2 months ago, Jim. We were all kind of astonished at the video of the student who was literally slammed to the ground and dragged across a classroom by a very, very overzealous police officer. But in a way, it was a good reminder of how our classrooms are becoming areas of criminalization. My son, of whom I am wonderfully proud, of course, is a reporter and did a story that his editor, I should say, his headline writer, talked about the pipeline from school to jail. And basically the theme of it was how schools are becoming areas where police officers are now enforcing discipline. And from those schools, young kids wind up getting sent off to reform schools, or if they're old enough, even penitentiaries. We have a lot of very severe problems in this country regarding the criminal justice system. And I think Bernie Sanders was definitely onto something. Once again, I don't know enough about the impact of medical marijuana, but I think in general, Bernie Sanders, as he so often is, was right on target.
Mm-hmm. All right, now jump around a little bit in politics. New Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, a Catholic, a conservative whose budget proposals have been denounced by the Conference of Bishops. Is there any hope for a more reasonable House of Representatives?
I think so. Paul Ryan has a reputation as a policy wonk. I think that is nonsense. Paul Ryan's policy initiatives basically have been, let's take Medicare, let's take Medicaid, let's take Social Security, let's privatize them all. His policy initiative for taxes has been to cut programs for the poor, give more tax cuts to the wealthy. Paul Krugman, who's of course, as we all know, a Nobel Prize laureate, economics prof at Princeton, Paul laureate, who really knows economics, says that Paul Ryan is an intellectual fraud in these areas. But the reason I think Paul Ryan has moved along so fast, he's a good politician. He's a very, very good politician. He's willing to talk to people. He's willing to listen to people. So he may be much more amenable to working with the White House than even John Boehner was. And Boehner was perfectly willing to do that, except he always had to watch his back because the Freedom Caucus was ready to cut his legs out from under him at any moment. Ryan is going in with this aura, and he's been there now, about a month, whatever. He's going in with this aura that the House Republicans need him. He's going to save the party. He can use that to do some things that hopefully will be good for the country.
Yeah, we'll see how much that less than ringing endorsement by the Freedom Caucus. We'll see where that is in a few months from now, too. That's the other thing to think about here. Lastly, before we let you go, what do you think of President Obama's decision to stay in Afghanistan and to put some U.S. troops into Syria?
I don't see what else we have done. I pray that there was another out. But I don't really see what else he could have done. Friend of mine, I won't mention his name, he's a public figure, was in Syria about a year ago. He came back. He's really a peacenik from day one. And he said, Fred, I was there for 2-3 weeks. I interviewed. He was over there in an official capacity. And he said, we got to do something. I don't know what. The situation for the Syrian people is absolutely brutal. It's horrible. It is an incredible situation, one of the worst, one of the most convoluted, certainly, that Obama has faced, and probably one of the most convoluted that any president has faced in a generation. As of right now, I think we've got to stay with the president, hope and pray things work. He's got to ultimately go the diplomatic route. Ultimately, I think Syria is only going to be solved when Obama gets some degree of cooperation from Russia.
Don't know if he's got time in this presidency, but we can keep our fingers crossed for that one. Fred Rotondaro, regular commentator here for America's Democrats. Yes.
That may be the only thing we've got.
Well, that's true, too. Fred, thank you so much for joining us today. As always, we do look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Jim, thank you.
And this is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. Lee Drutman, who studies Congress, says only crazy people want to run for office anymore. We'll talk to him more about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Good news, people. The boom is back. Good times are here again, thanks to an economic boom generated by, of all things, bad times. Tens of millions of Americans have been knocked down and held down in recent years by the collapse of jobs and wages. This calamity has led to a second blow for millions of the same families, who now find themselves buried in overdue bills for credit card charges, student loans, and other consumer debt. But there's a bright silver lining in that dark financial cloud. Only it's not for the indebted families, but for a booming breed of finance hucksters known as consumer debt buyers. Believe it or not, in the warped world of high finance, there's gold in them thar hills of bad debt. Such miners of human misery as Encore Capital Group buy bales of unpaid bills from banks and other lenders, paying pennies on the dollar. Then they unleash packs of their hard-nosed, aggressive collectors on the families. If they still can't extract payment, the debt profiteers turn to their meanest dog, the courts. Debt firms routinely file thousands of lawsuits a day against financially devastated Americans. They know that most debtors can't understand the legal gibberish in the suits, can't afford a lawyer, and can't mount an effective defense against the corporate lawyers. So, some 95% of these lawsuits produce default judgments against hapless borrowers, meaning debt buyers can then confiscate the wages of borrowers or freeze their bank accounts. This is Jim Hightower saying this boom in vulture capitalism is disgusting. But worse, it's subsidized by us taxpayers. We pay for that judicial system, the judges, courtrooms, and endless rounds of hearings. Predatory debt corporations have perverted our so-called justice system into their own subsidiary for squeezing profits out of destitute debtors.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Political scientist Lee Drutman analyzes what's wrong with our political system and asks the question, who wants to run for president? The answer? Only crazy people. And we say hello to Lee Drutman, political scientist who researches political influence, a fellow at New America. He's the author of the book, The Business of America is Lobbying, How Corporations Became Politicized and Politics Became Corporate. Lee Drutman, thank you very much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Pleasure to be with you.
Always nice to talk with you as well. Many Americans in both parties fed up with the fact that Washington seems broken, or is broken, and that usually leads back to Congress. How do we fix Congress so it can get things done? You've got 10 minutes.
I've got 10 minutes. Well, look, I think there's basically I see there's four things that need to happen. One, we have to have an electoral system in which people run for Congress who are genuinely interested in being problem solvers and not partisan hacks. And not just, you don't have people who just raise a lot of money, but people who are qualified, smart people who are interested in the process, not just the fundraising. So get better people into Congress to start. Two, I think we need to think about the support for good policy making outside of Congress. We now have a incredible growth of lobbying here in Washington, and almost all of that lobbying is corporate lobbying, which is narrow and particularistic. What we need is a real support for diffuse interest groups that can help to generate and support general interest policymaking in Congress. Three, we need resources inside Congress for members of Congress who actually want to do good problem-solving policymaking. We have not invested in congressional staff in over 30 years. We now have a third fewer committee staff than we had in 1980. Even if we had good people in Congress, they just don't have the resources within Congress to draft, develop, and advance legislation without relying on outside lobbyists. And as I just said, most of those outside lobbyists represent business. And finally, I think we need to think about the structure of Congress itself, right? Over the last several decades, more and more power has been concentrated in the leadership, and that's created more partisanship. It's reduced the deliberative capacity of committees, which were often places where compromises across parties were worked out. Good policies were developed, and now it's just they're not legislating. They're just campaigning all the time. So yeah, I mean that's. To me, those are the kind of four big areas. Get more good people into Congress, make it easier for them to do their job by providing them better resources both outside of Congress and inside of Congress, and decentralize power in Congress. I think if you did those four things, we would have a much more functional government.
Mm-hmm. The most extreme conservatives in the House and Senate seem to feel that government should do as little as possible. So without the votes replacing them, aren't we doomed to permanent gridlock?
No, I don't think so. The House Freedom Caucus makes up about 40 members of Congress in a chamber of 435. I can do the math. It's about 10% of the chamber. So a majority. I mean, maybe that their numbers are actually larger, but even so, that tells me that roughly 80% of people elected to Congress want to pass something and get stuff done. And even the folks who say they're anti-government, right? I mean, actually, they want to get something done. They want to reduce the size of government by cutting programs and simplifying government. And I mean, frankly, I think Democrats need to be honest. There are a lot of duplicative and wasteful programs that are undermining the efficiency of the government and so there is. I mean, obviously they go to far extremes, but I think that they do hit on some genuine concerns that are again, they take it to far extremes, but are not entirely out of hand.
Mm-hmm. I mean, is there enough there we've got to find some sort of common ground that the far left, far right can come in and agree on. So perhaps some of these duplicative laws, even that sort of roll over on each other. I mean, do we start there and then maybe at least get the ball rolling in a positive effect to where the left and right are working together?
Maybe. I think there's stuff left and right have come together on prison reform. They came together to cut the Pentagon budget. So I mean, you see a new kind of coalition emerging. So actually, we have a program at New America discussing these new types of coalitions. We call them transpartisan coalitions, in which you have the far left and the far right coming together. I think another area where folks should come together is supporting multi-party systems and proportional or instant runoff voting, multi-member districts that would allow in more diverse voices out. Beyond the two-party system leaves a lot of folks, I think, frustrated and creates a lot of perverse incentives that create zero-sum politics. So the U.S. is the only country in the world that has only two parties. Multi-party systems build more coalitional politics that allow for compromise and just bring in more voters because more people feel like their views are represented. I think we need to take a hard look at that. And frankly, I think that's another thing that would make Congress work a lot better is if we moved House elections to multi-member seats with instant runoff voting and allowed in multiple parties.
So a more parliamentary system.
More. I mean, and certainly a more parliamentary system. I think you'd see more coalitions emerge and more spaces for compromise, and just less zero-sum politics. Right. For now, for every Republican gain or every Democratic loss, demise is a Republican gain. Whereas in a multi-party system with, especially one with instant runoff voting, you want to be somebody else's second choice, and that changes the incentives greatly.
With each electoral cycle, there are more and more people, it seems to me anyway, that call for at least three-party or greater. Are we any closer right now than we've ever been to actually making that happen?
I think if you look at the number of people who call themselves independents, right? I mean, now most independents vote in a partisan way, but that's a choice that people are making to not associate themselves with either one of the parties. I think that's a trend that points in this direction. I think certainly people more than ever before. The approval ratings of both parties are down. Mostly people, it's not that they like their party; they just dislike the other party more. I think we are moving to a point where there'd be some receptivity to thinking about moving to multi-party systems. I mean, for a country this big to have only two parties, it's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does seem sort of silly, especially when you look around and realize that we're the only one doing it.
We are the only. I mean, that is. I don't think people realize that, but that the U.S. is the only advanced democracy with only two parties.
Mm-hmm. We're speaking with
every other country has at least two, sometimes usually more.
Yeah, we're speaking with
at least three.
I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you. All I want to do is let people know who I'm talking to. We're talking to Lee Drutman, political scientist, fellow at New America, and author of The Business of America is Lobbying. Another reason for some Washington gridlock, gerrymandering of congressional districts by Republican state legislatures. Is there anything that can or should be done about that? Or maybe just can be.
Well, I mean, there can be done as you can move to independent redistricting commissions. I mean, I tend to subscribe to the political science view that gerrymandering is not as big of a deal as a lot of people make it out to be. The bigger problem, and the real problem that Democrats have to confront, is that all of their votes are concentrated in the urban areas, or a lot of them are, and there's just a lot of super safe seats, which is actually why Democrats should support multi-member districts, because then you get larger you bring in like 5 House seats into one district, that might be all 60-40 Republican seats, but if they're all 60-40 Republicans, multi-member district with 5 seats would give you 2 Democrats and 3 Republicans, as opposed to 5 Republicans and no Democrats. So I think if you're concerned about gerrymandering, you should support multi-member districts.
Mm-hmm. You wrote an article recently asking why all our presidential candidates are so bad. Can you tell us a little bit of, answer that question here? And is it their fault or the voters' fault?
Well, it's everyone's fault, really. In part, it's the voters' fault, because I think voters want lots of things that are contradictory, and presidential candidates try to promise everything and then wind up constantly contradicting themselves because there are contradictions in promising things that are contradictory. But I think it's also the fault of the process. It's too long. And after a long time, when you have a media that's just basically trying to vet these people and self-appointed inquisitors, according to the Republicans, and there's something to the complaints that Republican candidates have about the media as just trying to do this self-appointed inquisitor vetting. I think there's value to it, but often I think the press does go a little overboard. It's a crazy process. It's way too long. It's way too negative, and it's full of overpromising. I think if we had a shorter process, that would be much better. Basically the problem is that given this whole rigmarole of running for president, who the heck wants to do it, right? Only crazy people, right? Nobody in their right mind would run for president. And you sort of see this process just take people down, right? People who you think, who start out seem like good, decent people, turn into just awful people by the end.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we should go to the what is Canada? It's like their whole political process is about a month or something, right? Maybe we need to go that route.
Yeah, again, the U.S. is a huge outlier here. Nobody else has primaries. Most countries have election periods that last a month or two, right? That's a reasonable amount of time. Most voters are partisan anyway, so they know who they're going to vote for beforehand. Yeah,
it shouldn't take 2 years to figure it out. That's for sure.
Yeah. But that's America, land of the endless election.
Right. Lee Drutman, political scientist, fellow at New America, and author of the book, The Business of America is Lobbying, How Corporations Became Politicized and Politics Became Corporate, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Lee, thank you so much for your time. We look forward to having you back again soon.
All right, great to chat. Thank you.
Thank you. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press talks with West Wing Reports editor Paul Brandus.
President Obama off on Hawaii, his big vacation in Hawaii, but before he left, he held a little news conference last Friday to basically to brag a little bit, take a little victory lap of what he's been able to accomplish this year. Down at the White House briefings, I am often right there alongside of Paul Brandus, who's head of and founder of West Wing Reports, westwingreports.com, author of a new book we've talked about called Under This Roof, A History of the White House and Presidency. Paul, Merry Christmas. Happy holidays.
And same to you, sir.
Last time I saw you was at the White House Christmas party. We had a good time.
Yes. Lamb chops were good.
Weren't they good?
That's the best. That's the only reason to go.
Can I
Those lamb chops are just...
I didn't ask you
Were you
something.
there?
I wasn't there. No, I don't do well with polite company.
But
Tell me about this eggnog. Because Bill talks about this eggnog, and I haven't had any of this eggnog yet.
Well, I'm not an eggnog guy. I just don't do that. But
all right.
I hear...
I'm not either, except at the White House. The eggnog there is killer.
You know what the secret to that is? I actually tweeted this last night. I saw that Dwight Eisenhower would take, the egg yolks and whatever, and basically like a bathtub full of a bourbon. That's the secret.
That's the secret.
And I just thought, why bother with the egg yolks? Just go straight to the,
Well, there is...
It's the bourbon. That
makes there's more good stuff than eggnog in the eggnog.
That's right.
That's what's important.
They serve at the White House. No, but it's always the White House looks particularly beautiful this year.
It was spectacular this year.
Yeah. All right. What did you say to the president?
I just wished. Look, we have 10 seconds. I wished him a Merry Christmas, and I took my sister this year. It was a huge thrill for her. If you've never met a president, here's what's interesting. She doesn't even like the guy, but that's not the point. You respect the office, not the person. And even though she's not an Obama person, she's very respectful. And it's a big thrill to meet. And with people who say, you know what, I hate that guy, I can never be. But you know what, when you are in the midst of any president, Bush, Obama, I don't care who it is, people change, and they're respectful, and I see it all the time. People say,
I'm glad your sister didn't embarrass you by saying,
I hate you.
But now, so as a segue to what we want to talk about, last year in 2014, in my 10 seconds there with the president, I said, Mr. President, don't let anybody tell you you're a dead duck. Because, he's entering that fateful period, the last 2 years of the presidency, which we want to talk about. So that was and he said right back to me, I'm not acting like one, am I? Point being, he comes into 2015, and he had a pretty good year. And that's unusual, isn't it? Tell us about this last 2 years, right, of any two-term presidency.
Well, if you go back and look at prior two-term presidents, every last two-term presidents, Eisenhower, Reagan, Clinton, and the second George W. Bush, they all ran into problems in their second term. There was a bad recession in Eisenhower's watch, for example. Reagan with Iran-Contra, Clinton got impeached, and Bush just, with the war and the economic collapse. Obama has avoided all of that. So historically, compared to the other guys, it looks like, unless something happens next year, he's going to end on a pretty good note. The polls don't necessarily reflect that because this continues to be, as you know, a really highly divided country. I mean, what's interesting is that for all the people who think, this guy's just going belly up, he continues to kind of move in the low to mid 40s in the polls. Not spectacular, but, anywhere from 42 to 45% approval, disapproval from about 50 to 53. So he's consistently underwater, but he's steady as it goes. Compared to the other guys that I mentioned, all of them took big hits in their second term. Yeah. They really did. I mean, Reagan, they all bounced back at the end, but they all had big problems. I think Obama is probably going to leave 45%, and that's just, his numbers now. Over time, of course, those numbers, historians will take another look, and they may, in fact, give him higher numbers than he has now, sort of like a Harry Truman kind of thing. Unpopular, but over time, people will realize, we're better off whether you like him or not. I think it's hard to deny that we're not better off now than we were 7 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
No doubt about it.
I think you have to say that. But it's interesting. Just maybe a little tangent here. I know this is a big debate among historians, that events shape the man, right? Man doesn't necessarily shape the events. In other words, no matter how good you are, look at what happened. George Bush gets in, and we get 9/11, right? And then we get this big reception. You could say he might have contributed to that big reception, but no matter what your plans are, things can happen that really throw you for a loop, right?
Well, Abraham Lincoln, when Lincoln came into office, he was not regarded as any big deal.
There you go.
He was a one-term congressman, an attorney. Talk about an inexperienced guy. 2 years in the House. He was just an attorney back in Illinois. Wasn't really all that much. He was an insecure man, wasn't very attractive, had kind of a funny voice. I mean, people didn't think all that much of him. But the Civil War made Lincoln. So to your point, events make the man. No question about it. Roosevelt during the 1930s. Absolutely true.
Now, so at Friday's news conference, the president said, okay, basically, you guys just thought I was, not going to be able to get anything done, but let's look back at 2015, and he's, railed off the Iran nuclear deal, the Paris climate deal,
right?
Opening up with Cuba, among other things. New progress with the Affordable Care Act, which is still in place, and
it's troubled. But
still in place, right? Yeah. And more people than ever signed up.
Yeah.
And for him, the TPP, right, which something I didn't like, but it was one of his goals, and he accomplished that. And he achieved all of that, Paul, kind of on his own, right? Didn't get much help from Congress.
Well, that's one of the criticisms, is that he did all these things on his own. But, of course, the White House fires back. Look,
they didn't have any option, right?
When they say, look, Obama hasn't been forceful or responsive enough on ISIS, it's fair to point out that these Republicans in Congress have not authorized force either. So,
there's no UMF.
You got to be fair, and if you're going to criticize them about that. The other thing that's interesting is that from an economic standpoint, yesterday, AAA, which tracks daily gasoline prices, said that for the first time since 2008, the average national price of gasoline slipped below $2.
I know. Yeah.
For the first time since 2008, the average American household has now saved, according to one analyst report that I read, close to $800 this year alone. That's nothing to sneeze at. Now, you can argue who gets the credit for that, but nevertheless, a $2 gas, and these Republicans back in 2012, Gingrich said, well, if I'm elected, we're going to get $2.50 gas in 4 years. And, of course, Romney said, well, if I'm elected, we're going to get 6% unemployment after 4 years. Well, we're already well below both of those benchmarks. You don't hear people talking about that. That's interesting.
No. I smile when you said you can argue about who gets the credit or who gets the blame. Or who gets the credit for the gas now being below $2, the national average. You know damn well if it were $4 or $4.50 or whatever, which maybe it should be from an environmental point of view, they would be blaming President Obama.
Well,
I mean, in fact, they did last summer, summer before last, whenever it was, the last spike we had in gas prices. They always blame the president for it.
Oh, sure, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, they forget that when George W. Bush, I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just telling you what the numbers are. When Bush was sworn in January 2001, gas was, I think, about $1.14, and because of the economic recovery, demand went up and all of that. By the summer of 2008, July 2008, that $1.14 went to $4.14. People were screaming, and then it went from $4.14 all the way down to $1.86 in 6 months when Obama was sworn in. And, gee, what could have happened in those 6 months? Could have been economic collapse. Maybe that had something to do with it. But people say, when Obama was sworn in, gosh, gas was only $1.86. You know why? Because the economy collapsed, you dunces. And so it moves in cycles. Presidents, for better or worse, get the blame.
Right. So all in all, President Obama says, and I think you have to agree, he had a pretty good year, and he vowed, Paul, that 2016 he was going to keep at it full throttle. And we'll talk when we come back about what might be on the agenda for him and for us in the 2016. Again, West Wing Reports, to sign up and find out what's happening at that end of Pennsylvania Avenue. From Paul Brandus, westwingreports.com.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Fred Rotondaro, Lee Drutman, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the show and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate.